Joel Osteen once said, "I'm excited about my new book, Every Day a Friday, How to Be Happier 7 Days a Week." His empire was worth $110 million in 2020, but something happened that changed everything. By 2025, insiders say he lost $60 million in just 5 years. His mega mansion went up for sale, his private jet disappeared, and staff at Lakewood Church started getting laid off quietly. But the shocking part is what Joel does for money now. It isn't preaching, it's something his congregation would never expect. The man who taught millions about prosperity is now desperate, and his secret income source will blow your mind. Joel Osteen was born on March 5, 1963, in Houston, Texas. The youngest of 6 children raised in a house filled with sermons, prayer, and camera wires. His father, John Osteen, had once been a Southern Baptist preacher but left the denomination and started Lakewood Church in 1959. Converting an old feed store into the first sanctuary where 90 people showed up on opening day. John's charismatic preaching, faith, healing, and speaking in tongues drew crowds and expanded the church rapidly. Joel watched it all from the front row as a boy, soaking in the energy of change. That rhythm shifted in 1981 when Joel was 18 and his mother, Dodie Osteen, was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. Doctors sent her home with no treatment options, but after intense prayer she recovered, later writing a book titled Healed of Cancer. This miracle shaped Joel's view of faith, hope, and the power of spoken words. Despite being raised in a ministry-driven home, Joel didn't want to preach. He preferred cameras, editing, and storytelling from behind the scenes. While Lakewood grew from 90 members to over 1,000 by the 1970s, Joel focused on building the church's media presence and helped his father's weekly television broadcast expand to 100 countries. Still, people expected him to preach someday, but he resisted. John Osteen himself had a complicated past, including a quiet divorce from his first wife, Emma Jean Schaefer, in the early 1950s. Something the church never discussed because a divorced pastor was bad optics. Joel grew up understanding the difference between what people show and what they hide. The family finances were tight, and Joel watched his father self-publish 45 books while Joel built the media side of Lakewood. By 19, he was basically running the TV ministry. He went to Oral Roberts University but dropped out after 1 year to focus entirely on Lakewood's media operations. He had no theology degree, no sermons, but he knew cameras, editing, lighting, and how to build a broadcast empire. Joel's doctor helped Lakewood's attendance surge to 6,600 by 1984, and the broadcast expanded globally. He married Victoria in 1987, telling her he never wanted to preach. Meanwhile, his siblings pursued different ministries, but Joel stayed behind the scenes. At 19, Joel convinced his father to let him start a TV broadcast from scratch, and by 1983 he was ordained through Lakewood even though he wasn't preaching. For 17 years, he directed every broadcast, edited every frame, and even tracked his father's shirts on yellow legal pads to avoid repeated outfits. He took church finances into his own hands in the mid-80s, secretly cutting sponsorship deals with local businesses, tripling the media ministry's income from $100,000 to over $300,000 by 1987. Then he pushed Lakewood to invest in KTBU TV 55, a Houston station he built from scratch using $2 million in church funds. By 1990, that station reached 10 million homes. Through the 1990s, Joel worked 12-hour days and ran Lakewood like a top-tier production studio. He still refused to preach until January 1999, when his father convinced him to do one sermon. 6 days later, John Osteen died suddenly of a heart attack. Joel had preached once in his life. He offered the pulpit to his siblings, but none accepted. His wife, Victoria, urged him to step in. On October 3, 1999, he became senior pastor of Lakewood Church, inheriting a $90 million a year organization facing a 20% drop in donations. Joel had to pour in his own money to keep the church alive. He shortened sermons, modernized music, and attendance surged from 6,000 to over 10,000 within a year. In October 1999, his TV show launched with millions tuning in. But behind the scenes, Lakewood was in financial crisis, forcing Joel to cut costs, run emergency fundraisers, and work nonstop to stabilize the church. By 2005, Lakewood grew to 15,000 weekly attendees and bought the 16,500-seat Compact Center, paying $1.8 million up front and taking a $100 million loan to renovate it. By July 2005, Lakewood became the largest church in the United States. They finally paid off the $100 million loan on December 31, 2023. After years of tithing, Joel emphasized faith over pressure, and the payoff became a historic moment in megachurch fundraising. Lakewood expanded globally, with multilingual services and broadcasts reaching 200 million homes by 2010. But growth brought problems. In 2003, an accountant embezzled $200,000. By 2017, the church collected $83 million in donations, and critics questioned how little went to missions. Joel and Victoria refused church salaries, instead living off book sales. His 2004 book, Your Best Life Now, sold over 8 million copies and generated over $55 million. His next book brought in $13 million. He signed a major deal with FaithWords and released I Declare in 2012, which sold 30,000 copies in a week. The books fed the sermons and the sermons fed the books, creating a massive money loop. Night of Hope events filled stadiums, including Yankee Stadium in 2009, generating huge revenue. His audiobook Breakout became a bestseller in 2013, and church donations rose 15% after its release. But in 2015, a lawsuit claimed he didn't write his own books, alleging heavy use of ghostwriters. This damaged his authenticity and raised new controversy. Joel and Victoria had long faced scrutiny over their lifestyle, especially after purchasing a $10.5 million mansion in River Oaks. In 2004, the 17,000 square foot property became a symbol of prosperity preaching gone too far. In 2005, Victoria faced a shoplifting accusation involving $1,200 of merchandise at an airport, though charges were dropped. In 2003, she became co-pastor, and by 2010, their children were involved in Lakewood as well, fueling accusations of nepotism. In 2011, the Osteens bought a $2.9 million California vacation home, sparking more criticism. Joel defended their prosperity as a blessing. By 2015, his net worth reached $50 million. When Hurricane Harvey hit in 2017, Lakewood initially remained closed, drawing massive backlash. Joel eventually opened the church, donated $1 million of his own money, and launched recovery efforts. In 2020, Lakewood accepted a $4.4 million PPP loan during the pandemic, sparking more controversy given Joel's wealth. They repaid it in 2021, but the criticism continued. That same year, the IRS began auditing prosperity preachers, including Joel. An audit dating back to 2007 flagged $89 million in media income routed through personal channels, technically legal but questionable. Critics said his theology was consumerism disguised as scripture. Joel stayed unfazed and kept preaching generosity and positivity as his image and fortune continued to spark debate. Fred Rogers never meant for anyone to read those letters. He wrote them quietly, usually late at night, after the rest of the house had gone still. He would sit by the window with only a small lamp on, listening to the faint hum of the Pittsburgh streets outside, and pour his doubts, fears, and hopes onto the page. He had spent decades teaching children how to deal with their feelings. But he never told them how heavy his own heart could become, how deeply it hurt him to watch the world grow colder, louder, and more divided. Every year, on his birthday, he wrote a letter to God asking the same question: am I doing enough? To the world, Fred Rogers was the gentlest man alive, but privately, he wrestled with a burden most people never knew existed. He carried the stories children shared with him, the grief, the loneliness, the questions that parents were too busy to answer. He carried every tragedy he had ever addressed on his show, and he carried the weight of expectation. Millions believed he could make the world kinder, simply by showing up. But in 1983, something happened that shook him in a way he could barely speak about. A young viewer wrote to him after losing his father. The letter was filled with fear, confusion, and anger. Fred responded personally as he always did, but that night, he broke down. He told Joanne that he wished he could take every hurting child in his arms, one by one, and tell them they were safe. But he knew he couldn't reach them all, and that reality haunted him. Joanne would later reveal that this was the first night she ever saw him cry for himself. As the years passed, the letters became longer, more introspective. He wrote about aging, about responsibility, and about the fear that he would one day be forgotten. He wondered whether kindness could survive in a world obsessed with speed and noise. He worried that the values he had spent a lifetime teaching would disappear. But he also wrote about hope, quiet, steady hope. He believed that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward for generations. And he believed that if children were taught to understand their own feelings and accept others' feelings, the world could still change. In his final birthday letter, written just months before his death in 2003, he wrote, "I tried to be a helper. I hope that was enough." Joanne kept that letter hidden for years, too personal, too sacred to share. But eventually, she realized the world needed to hear it. People needed to know that even the kindest man of his generation questioned himself. Even he felt inadequate. And yet, he continued to show up every single day for others. When the letter was finally revealed to the public, it changed the way people remembered him. It made Mr. Rogers human, not just a symbol, not just a television host, but a man who fought private battles while helping millions fight theirs, and perhaps that is his greatest legacy. He showed us that kindness is not the absence of struggle. It is the decision to be gentle in spite of it, not his faith, never that, but his purpose. Am I doing enough? Am I helping anyone? Am I who you want me to be? Those were the questions Fred Rogers wrote to God. Every single year, on his birthday. Joanne Rogers said that letters were never meant for anyone else to read. They were private, sacred, a window into the heart of a man the world thought they knew, but didn't. Because behind the soft voice, the sweaters, and the gentle smile was a man who carried a lifelong fear. But he wasn't good enough, and that fear began when he was just a boy. Fred grew up painfully shy, teased for being quiet. For being different, he created imaginary friends. Just to feel less alone, those early years shaped everything he later built. The puppets, the characters, the songs, they weren't toys, they were lifelines. But there was something else people never knew. Every time Fred filmed a new episode, he prayed not for fame, not for success. He prayed to be used. Let me be a helper today. He'd whisper before the cameras rolled, and most days, it worked, but not always. In the late 1970s, when television executives pressured him to modernize the show, to add more color, more noise, more excitement, Fred refused. He said children didn't need more chaos, they needed calm, they needed honesty. His stance nearly got the show canceled. Joanne said it was the only time she ever saw him truly discouraged. He wondered if he was becoming irrelevant, too old, too gentle, too out of touch for a changing world. But then something happened that restored him. A mother wrote a letter. Her little boy was autistic, unable to speak, resistant to touch, nervous around strangers, except when Mr. Rogers was on. One day, the boy saw Fred on TV singing "It's You, I Like," and he walked over to the screen and kissed it. Joanne said Fred held that letter like it was a treasure map. He kept it in his desk for years, because to him, helping one child meant everything. But even then, there was one story Fred never expected to hear. One that shook him more deeply than almost anything in his career. It involved a young man, a fan, who had grown up in an abusive home. He said Mr. Rogers was the only person who made him feel safe, the only adult who spoke to him gently, the only voice he trusted. Years later, when he became a Marine, he carried one thing with him through every deployment: a small photo of Fred taped inside his helmet. When Fred heard the story, he cried, not out of pride but out of heartbreak, because all he ever wanted, all he ever prayed for, was to help people feel loved, even after the cameras stopped, even after the world moved on, even after he was gone. For decades, Fred Rogers had been a symbol of calm, kindness, and safety. But after he passed away in 2003, the world discovered a side of him almost no one knew existed. Every year on his birthday, every single year, Fred sat alone in his study, closed the curtains, and wrote a letter. Not to a friend, not to a fan, not even to his wife. He wrote to God. He never showed them to anyone, never read them out loud. They were deeply personal, almost like he was having a conversation with someone he believed was listening. Even when no one else was. Joanne, his wife of 50 years, found the letters only after he was gone. They were neatly placed in a wooden box on the top shelf of his closet. When she opened the first one, her hands started shaking. Fred didn't write about fame, he didn't write about awards, he didn't care about ratings or money. He wrote about something else. Entirely, he wrote about fear. Fear that he wasn't doing enough. Fear that he wasn't helping enough. Fear that the world outside his television neighborhood was getting colder, harsher, and more dangerous. And he wasn't sure his gentle voice was strong enough to change it. In one letter he wrote, "Dear God, I worry I'm failing. I speak softly, but the world is so loud. Children are hurting more than ever, and sometimes I feel small." Joanne had to sit down. She had never seen him doubt himself, not once. To the world, Fred Rogers was unshakable kindness. He was a good man with a warm heart. But in these letters, he was something else entirely. A man questioning if he had done enough. But the most shocking letter, the one Joanne kept hidden for years, was written just months before he died. In it, Fred revealed a secret pain from his childhood, something he had never spoken about publicly, not even in interviews. And in that same letter, he made a heartbreaking confession about the moment he almost quit television forever, and the single child who changed his mind. This part of the story had never been told. He questioned his purpose, his kindness, and whether he was doing enough for a world that often felt broken. Joanne said those letters were the only place Fred ever allowed himself to be uncertain. On TV, he was calm, gentle, unwavering. But on paper, he was human, fragile, searching. And then, in his final years, something changed. In 2001, just a few months before his illness was discovered, Fred did something he almost never did. He canceled a full day of production. No explanation, no warning. His team didn't know what happened until hours later, when they found him alone in the old studio, sitting on the worn neighborhood bench, crying. Nobody knew why. But Joanne revealed the truth. Years later, Fred had received a letter. Not a fan letter, not a complaint, not a request, a confession. It was from a man who said Fred's show had saved his life as a child. Literally, he wrote that he grew up in a violent home, and the only time he felt safe was when Mr. Rogers told him, "You are special, just the way you are." Fred read that line out loud to himself over and over again until his hands shook. Joanne said he kept repeating one sentence. I hope I deserved that. He never believed he was extraordinary. He believed he was simply doing his duty to love people the best he could. But that letter, it broke him open. For the first time in decades, Fred Rogers doubted whether he had given enough, loved enough, been enough. And yet what happened next showed exactly who he was. That night, he wrote one final birthday letter to God. In it, he didn't ask for success, or strength, or even more time. He asked for gentleness. Let me be gentle, he wrote, even when I am tired, even when I am afraid, let me be gentle. After that night, everyone noticed something. He slowed down, spoke softer, hugged a little longer. It was as if he knew his time was shrinking, and every remaining moment mattered. Joanne said that in their final year together, Fred started ending every day with the same sentence. Did I make someone feel loved today? Fred's letters weren't long. They weren't poetic. They were simple. Handwritten notes, just a man talking to the one he hoped was listening. But in the final years of his life, those letters changed. They became heavier, more urgent. Because Fred Rogers, the man who comforted millions, was quietly fighting something he told almost no one about. His health was declining. He was in pain, and every year, on his birthday, the questions on the page grew more emotional. Did I do enough? Was I kind enough? Did I make the children feel safe? He worried deeply that he hadn't. Imagine that. The man who spent his entire life making the world gentler wondered if it was enough. And then came the letter from his very last birthday, the one Joanne found after he died. Unlike the others, this one wasn't a prayer, it was a confession. Fred wrote that he didn't fear death, he feared being forgotten. He wrote that television had changed so much, louder, meaner, faster, and he was afraid his message wouldn't survive. But Joanne kept that letter. And after his passing, she made a decision that changed everything. She would protect his legacy the way he had protected children. She opened their home. She released his private archives. She shared the stories he wasn't humble enough to tell himself, how he answered every single piece of fan mail by hand, how he visited sick children even when cameras weren't around, how he invited troubled teenagers to his set so they could feel safe for one afternoon. Slowly, the world remembered, and a new generation discovered him, not as a TV host, but as a gentle warrior who believed kindness could reshape a child's entire life. And then something extraordinary happened. 20 years after his death, a university study revealed that children who grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood actually showed higher empathy, greater emotional control, and better conflict resolution than kids who didn't. Fred's deepest fear had been wrong. He had done enough, more than enough. Today, every letter he wrote, including the ones he never meant for the world to see, is preserved in an archive with his handwriting fading, but his message stronger than ever.